Thank you all for coming today. Clearly, this is a topic that's important to our community. The event today is a collaboration between the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce, the Buncombe County Tourism Development Authority, the Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods, and the Asheville Bed and Breakfast Association. We had originally planned to hold this event in our boardroom at the Chamber. It's about 60 people. But it was clear early on that there would be more interest in attending than that room could hold. And so we really are grateful to the Diana Wortham Theater and John Ellis and his team for making this great facility available to us today. I'd like to recognize the president of the Chamber, Dick Kramer, and the newest member of the Chamber team, my colleague in charge of public policy, Toby Weeks. If you have more comments afterwards, Toby is your guy. And several elected officials were with us today. We really appreciate you coming. North Carolina Representative Brian Turner, right here. City Councilman and TVA Board Member Jan Davis. City Council Member Gwen Whistler. City Councilman Cecil Bothwell. City Councilman Mark Hunt. And Senator Terry Van Dyne is represented by Laura Simile. Joining us today. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. We decided to host this event for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, we are aware of activity that's happening on a state level because this issue is really so much bigger than our own community. And so we wanted to give people in Asheville an opportunity to know what that activity looked like and have a chance to provide comment to that process. And I'll introduce Lynn Mingus in just a minute. We're really grateful to Lynn Mingus for being our keynote speaker representing the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association today. Secondly, we wanted to provide an opportunity to share information. We're not here today to try to push a policy or to find the answers to this, but I really think a good first step is to listen to one another, to share perspectives, and really look for areas where there is broad-based agreement. The next step is, to move on in other kinds of formats to, work on those more challenging problems that exist on either end. But we really hope that today's discussion will highlight areas of agreement and perhaps, narrow down that list of difficult issues. Short-term rentals have proliferated in Asheville to a much greater extent than other areas of the state. A recent search on Airbnb, for example, lists over 780 rentals in the Asheville area. By comparison, there are only 400 listed in Raleigh, and they have 5 times our population. And there's less than 400 listed for Charlotte, and that's a community with 9 times the population of Asheville. Tourism is, really important to our local economy. It's led Buncombe County to have the lowest unemployment rate in the state. The county welcomes more than 9 million visitors every year, with more than 3 million of them staying overnight. And those visitors spend $1.5 billion in our community, supporting our local businesses. And it supports 23,000 jobs. And that sustains the quality of life by supporting amenities that we love to have as people who live here. State and local taxes generated by tourism saves the average household in Buncombe County $1,251 every year. So the significant contribution to visitor spending has not happened by accident, and it has not happened everywhere. We looked at how Asheville has performed since the year 2000. Buncombe County visitor spending has grown by 98%. The average across the state was 68%. So this is the result of 30 years of really sustained investment. In 1983, the leadership of the hospitality industry in Buncombe County got together and became one of the first 3 counties in the state to self-impose an occupancy tax that operates as a surcharge on top of the sales tax. So if you're an overnight guest in commercial lodging in Buncombe County, you pay a 7% sales tax that gets distributed to state and county and local governments, and you pay a 4% occupancy tax that has been reinvested in promotion that brings visitors to our community. So it's been a real 2000, we've had the highest rate of growth. So tourism has not happened by accident. It's been a really important part of the vitality of our local economy. So we really appreciate that you all are spending your afternoon with us, to kind of start the dialogue about this important issue of short-term rentals. Here's how the day is going to go. We're going to hear from Lynn in just a few minutes, and then we have a panel of people who represent a variety of viewpoints on this topic, and each of them will have 5 minutes to present their perspective. And then we're going to have 2 mics down here for anybody in the audience who has a perspective to share or a question to answer. The only rules are that we're asking audience members to limit your time to 2 minutes because we anticipate that there will be a lot of discussion, and also that we maintain a civil environment with appreciation for how hard it is to sit yourself down here at this table, and to kind of provide some leadership in this area. So our guest speaker today is Lynn Minges, the Executive Director of North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association. Prior to assuming her role in December of 2012, Lynn was affectionately our tourism leader. She was the State Tourism Director, operating in many capacities for the North Carolina Department of Commerce. Under her leadership, visitor spending in the state of North Carolina doubled to $19 billion a year. And she was a leader in increasing our market share to become the 6th most visited state in the nation. So thank you so much, Lynn, for being here and welcoming you to the
Stephanie, I'm going to a little challenge here in case you wonder, I fell out of my attic bringing Christmas boxes down, broke my arm. I'm 5 weeks into it, so I hope I'm going to lose this any day now. But let's see. Let's make sure we can. There we go. There we go. Okay, so today we're going to talk about short-term rentals and why they're a bit of a concern to our industry, and that's the restaurant and lodging community in North Carolina, what some of the issues are around this. I don't pretend to be an expert on this matter. I'm just here looking after our members. Let me tell you a little bit about the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association. Across North Carolina, there are about 17,000 restaurants and about 1,700 lodging properties. And you can imagine what would happen if each of those individual businesses and business owners went to the General Assembly and lobbied for their issues independently. Or they were trying to fight an issue here in this community or in any municipality across North Carolina. They're busy, most of them every day, running their businesses. And the last thing in the world they want to have to deal with and track and follow on a daily basis are the policies, the governments, the oversight that impacts their businesses. In fact, many of them, I think, are often unaware of the kinds of things that are considered and might be imposed on their business if it weren't for our organization and the advocacy we do on their behalf. We currently have about 3,000 stakeholders across the state, people who pay us membership dues. We're a membership organization, and they tend to be people who are really engaged and really invested in the industry. Again, they're busy running their businesses, and every single day we're down at the General Assembly, and we look forward to working with you, Representative Turner, and others to craft good public policy that will help advance and continue the prosperity that we enjoy in this state in terms of hospitality growth. And we've seen great growth over many, many years. We also have just entered into a partnership with AHOA. I see we've got several AHOA members here today. AHOA is the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. So again, we are working in concert with them on a number of key issues that impact our industry. We're also partners with the American Hotel and Lodging Association and the National Restaurant Association. So just as we are focused primarily on issues that impact our businesses here in North Carolina and in municipalities across the state, the American Hotel and Lodging Association is our partner, and they're advocating walking halls of Congress every day, as well as the National Restaurant Association. For example, last night, many of you probably watched the President's address. Within minutes, there were already position papers coming out of these two organizations with what the impact of some of those things he talked about would have on our industry. Some of them good, some of them not so good. So we then began the process of filtering that out to our members and putting a face to those issues and what they could mean for our businesses. So that's just a little bit about us and what we do. I've articulated here, or written out just a few of the key issues that we're focused on in the upcoming legislative session. One top of our list is Airbnb, and that's what we're gonna talk about today, or better known as short-term rentals, because Airbnb is just one of the many players in this space. We're also focused on online travel companies and making sure that they are paying and remitting, or collecting and remitting the appropriate occupancy taxes that they collect from folks. We're always very interested in occupancy taxes and good legislation from the state and the appropriate usage of those. Our members have historically opposed meals taxes, which sometimes crop up, and I'm proud to tell you that thanks to the good work of our association, and I've only been there a couple of years, but for the past 22 years, there has not been a new meals tax passed in North Carolina, mainly because our members feel pretty strongly that that's an unfair tax lobby discretionally on just one sector of our state's economy, or our local economy. We fight school calendar bills, many ABC bills that come up during session, and we often wonder and talk about things like, why is noon the magic hour that you can sell alcohol on Sundays? You know, around this state, we're doing a burgeoning brunch business, and we scratch our heads sometimes and say, why do the state and why don't local communities want those dollars and want to employ folks and generate revenue at 11 o'clock? You know, what's magic about 12? I don't know that we're ready to fix that just yet, but we're certainly talking about it. And I could go on and on and on. Carbon monoxide detectors, you know, when the deaths in Boone happened last year, we were pretty engaged in that. So those are just a few of the kinds of issues that we deal with on a daily basis, and not from a broad scale basis, but we talk about how those particular issues impact our industry, our members. But today, there we go. We're here to talk about short-term online rentals. That's the topic of the day, and I don't proclaim to be an expert, but we're going to talk about several issues around this topic. First and foremost, leveling the playing field, equal treatment, guest safeguards, and a collaborative approach, and I think that's what this forum today aims to foster, is a collaborative approach to addressing this issue. So first of all, let's talk about leveling the playing field. First, I want to make it clear that our members do not fear competition. We welcome new platforms that enable our members to distribute room nights to the traveling public. In fact, many of our members market their product through Airbnb. Airbnb is not a bad thing, and they're a very innovative business model, and one that we honestly admire and welcome into our community. But they are, we believe, like our members, in the lodging business, and they need to be treated as such. And so we're all about leveling the playing field to ensure that that happens. With that said, our members have several operating standards in common. They are required by law to provide safe and sanitary and secure environment for their guests. This includes clean sheets, hot and cold running water, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and fire escape plans, just to name a few. The rooms they rent are considered a retail business, and the classification requires that our members collect and remit sales and occupancy taxes from each guest. All of our member properties undergo some level of state and local zoning assessment to ensure that they're in line with their surroundings and that they're complying with local rules and regulations. Many short-term online rentals are amazingly able to connect with consumers through technological platforms, but they do not follow these same guidelines, and we think that creates an unfair, unlevel playing field for our members. And then there's the issue of guest safeguards. There's a lack of regulatory structure for the short-term online rental market, and that, we believe, poses a threat to the welfare of guests and the broader community at large. Our members every day go about to the business of checking their smoke detectors and sprinkler systems and fire extinguishers here in North Carolina. The health department comes in and regulates those kind of things. The fire marshal comes after them. Their door lock checks are taking place. First responder systems are being reviewed, and health and safety inspectors are being performed. And that's not happening in short-term rentals. And we are not sure that consumers are aware of that. And so that, again, is another issue. And as you might imagine, providing these kinds of things for guest safety and security causes our members to incur costs that are borne by online rentals. And then really, so there we go. And then fourthly, an issue that some of you have shared with me as you came in, is the interest in a collaborative approach, and that is that there are property owners and stakeholders at the neighborhood level, tax associations, disability advocates, affordable housing proponents, lots and lots of other advocates who have skin in the game, and many of you all are here in this room today. And so we recognize that by no means does the Restaurant and Lodging Association or the lodging community or the Bed and Breakfast Association need to take this on independently. We will be more successful in solving this issue if we work collaboratively. So let me just share with you a little bit a little bit more about Airbnb, and that is that first and foremost, did I advance to these slides? Hang on one second. It is big business it's big business anyway. It might surprise you to know that, sometimes we talk about Airbnb, we talk about the neighbor up the street who rents a room, and it's really not so much about that. It's the fact that Airbnb is a huge corporation. They are a $10 billion, their sales last year were $10 billion. They are bigger in sales than many of the national hotel brands that you know and recognize. It's huge business. It's a big emerging marketplace. These are not small-time players. They're very innovative and very successful. And they're good people. They're good people, and we welcome them to our community. But they're growing and thriving, and they're doing that in a fairly unregulated environment. Last year, room bookings with Airbnb, last year alone, went from 300,000 to 1 million rooms. And that is not expected to stop anytime soon. It's going to continue to grow. There'll be new players in the marketplace. I think the challenge we're seeing is that this has all happened so quickly, and to their credit, happened so quickly that there really aren't rules and regulations in place to regulate it. You might remember many years ago when online retail sales took place, and there was not a system in place to collect sales tax with that. And so they had to go back and figure out how they were going to it was a process that they went through to figure out how they were going to capture sales tax. Similarly, you remember food trucks. Do you all have any food trucks here? Food trucks are really big in communities. And several years ago, that was a big issue. How in the world can these food trucks come in and compete head-to-head with restaurants without being regulated? And so, authorities at the time had to work through that issue, and they had to put in place zoning issues, or where can they park, and how are they permitted, and are they licensed, and they had to apply for a sales tax permit, and they had to remit sales taxes, and they have to open themselves up to inspections by health departments. It's all part of the process. And so similarly, this is a new way of doing business. This is a new entity, a new game in town, and we have to work together to figure out appropriate rules and regulations to level the playing field. When we talk about the playing field here, to the left are traditional businesses. And this is not just lodging properties, this is any property, any business that operates in the state of North Carolina. Has to provide appropriate health and safety guidelines. Many of them comply with ADA requirements, and so on and so forth. They have to have insurance. They have to comply with local zoning ordinances. They have to pay taxes. That's true of all lodging properties, bed and breakfast, any business that operates in the state. But when you look at short-term rentals, they really don't play by that guideline. There are no requirements at all for health and safety oversight. There are no requirements for insurance, or nobody's making them or checking behind them to make sure they have insurance. And what we're hearing is that homeowner insurance does not adequately insure the liability that could be incurred there. They don't always meet with zoning guidelines and comply with those. And we believe that most aren't remitting taxes. And sometimes, as Airbnb will tell you, is we pay taxes where they require us to do it, but you all don't require us to do that. And that's kind of what they've told us here in North Carolina. There's no law. There's nothing that says we have to pay taxes, so we don't. We do it in San Francisco where they have a law in place, and we do it in Portland where they have a law in place, but you don't have a law in place that requires us to do it in North Carolina, so we're not going to do it. And so, there is an opportunity. I think they're good citizens and they would do the right thing. We've just got to figure out how to make that appropriate. And you'll see that you're not alone. As Stephanie mentioned, this is actually a diagram that I got from another organization on this topic. And they had listed some of the areas across the country where short-term rentals are becoming a pretty popular thing. Asheville, North Carolina is on that map, so congratulations. You'll see here it's a pretty good company with other nationally acclaimed, most of these are major leisure travel destinations. The research would tell you that folks who stay in Airbnb or short-term rentals are not business travelers, they're not large leisure travelers, and they tend to migrate or aggregate around some of these better-known tourist attractions, so congratulations, you're a hot commodity. There are currently no other states that have legislation in place to deal with this, except that there are several that are looking at it. And we in North Carolina are pretty far along the lines of looking at it here in North Carolina. We're going to talk about what we're doing from a state perspective. The state of Texas is also looking at this, putting something in statewide that would try to help deal with the issue. And the state of Florida is as well. So you might continue to follow those states and stay tuned. It's gonna be interesting as we go forward. There is a pretty important stakeholder in all this that we've learned, and I've already met several neighbors here, and they really have a lot of interest in the issue. There's an organization called Neighbors for Overnight Oversight. Say that 3 times. Have any of you all heard of that organization? Some of you haven't. Let me tell you why they're important. What we found is that there is the issue of leveling the playing field that lodging properties care about, but you know, Joe Consumer, not every public policy person cares about that. The message that really resonates well is the first person narrative of the neighbor. You know, where their neighborhoods are being threatened, zoning rules are being violated, safety and security concerns are issued, property values are issued. And so that really is a good phase for messaging to the issue. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can get engaged in that organization and why that's important. Their focus is a little bit different than ours, although, as Stephanie mentioned before, we're looking for common oversight. Neighbors, primarily, are not as concerned about leveling the playing field like we are. They are concerned about health and safety, not so much of the guests, but of their neighborhood and the threats to it. They are concerned about issues like affordable housing, about equal responsibility, and about community integrity. And so those become some key issues from that community. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. In terms of what model legislation would look like, if we could fix this, if we could address all the issues that need to be addressed, and I don't know that this is a comprehensive list, but this is a pretty darn good list. There are several issues, and we'll talk through it. So if we could pass one law and address all the issues, it might include these elements. Protecting consumers. It would provide fire protection and door locks, health and safety inspections, and accessibility requirements. If we could address the community issues, it would be proper zoning, providing by proper zoning, protective affordable housing, proper insurance, and notification. And I think that's key. Neighbors who have short-term rentals taking place in their neighborhood have a right to know that that business has taken place. There ought to be some mechanism for them to know, besides just looking out and seeing strange faces in their neighborhood. There needs to be some formal notification in place. And then finally, we get to the issues that my association is primarily concerned about, and that is collecting and remitting owed taxes, proper licensing, and notice of requirements. Again, making themselves known, some sort of licensing or inventory that they would have to subscribe to so that you can enforce the laws. What we hear sometimes is that these folks aren't paying taxes because they're not, nobody knows they owe them, so there's really not a good way to police them. So I want to segue to talk a little bit about some of the activities underway here in North Carolina, what we're doing or what we know to be happening across the state. And we really believe that even though you all are wrestling with this issue here in Asheville, I will tell you that the city of Raleigh this has been very much in the forefront in Raleigh. The Raleigh City Council addressed the issue last night. It's had a couple of public hearings on the issue. Last night it was referred to a committee, and they're looking at some recommendations to come out of that. We've been involved in that. Steve Mange, my colleague, has been following that pretty closely. But we're involved with several activities. I want to talk to you about this. Partnership for Neighbors for Overnight Oversight. I'll tell you a little bit more about our particular engagement with that. We recently made a presentation to the North Carolina General Assembly to get this on their radar. We had never heard about Airbnb until about a month ago. We are actively engaged with the media on this issue because that's where a lot of issues get dealt with, is in the media and telling those stories. We're involved in educating stakeholders, much like we're doing here today. We're trying to get in front of the public everywhere we can, get in front of stakeholder groups, and they are diverse. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about some of our goals for the upcoming session. But first of all, activities that this organization, Neighbors for Overnight Oversight, hard for me to say. What this organization does, they really are working hard to try to get all the stakeholders together. And so I would encourage you to go to this website, jot this down, and take a look. They have information there about the issue, what's happening in your community. They also have sample letters to the editors that you can write.
They have talking points, they have all kinds of information that would be helpful to you all. And I'll give you an example of one of the stakeholders, one of my members who signed up to be involved in that. Her name is Doris Yukovich. She owns a bed and breakfast, the Oakwood Inn in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she had come to us and was complaining, and you know, her business, she and her husband had been in business for, I don't know, 20 years, and suddenly they're about to lose their home. It was a B&B that they've operated successfully. They were 100% full nearly every night, and suddenly the business is drying up. And so she began to look up and down the street, and she's seeing house after house after house that, you know, had strange people coming and going in that. And so she's looked around, and on her street alone, in historic Oakwood, downtown Raleigh, there are about a dozen homes that are being rented for, you know, the short-term rentals. And she became aware of Airbnb, and she logged on and looked at what was in the marketplace, and there are some 25, 30 hotels in her neighborhood, just right around the block, that are renting rooms every single night. And she's scratching her head. She says, you know, the city of Raleigh has zoning that I comply with, because she has to provide all street parking, so part of her yard is dedicated for parking. She's got to maintain that. She has to remit sales tax. She has to remit occupancy tax to the city that funds the CBD. She has to open her doors to inspections from the health department and, you know, to the fire marshal who comes and makes sure that she's got carbon monoxide detectors and smoke alarms. She does those kinds of things, but the neighbors all around her don't have to do that. And she told this story, and it's pretty compelling. She said that the other day, somebody knocked on her door, she went to the front door, and there was a lady standing there. She goes, hey Doris, she said, I was in town and I wanted to stop by and see you. And she said, I've stayed with you for the past 10 years. I come to this annual event, you know, every year, and you know, I've always stayed with you. She said, but you know, I looked online, somebody was telling me that I could get a different room in this neighborhood. And she said, instead of paying you $100 a night, I was able to get a room up the street for $65. And she said, so I really didn't have much choice but to stay there. And she said the sad part about it was that the lady had in her hand a Raleigh visitor guide that was funded with her occupancy tax dollars. And so the light went off that, you know, here's Doris following the letter of the law, doing the right thing, providing health and safety and security to her guests, providing a good, positive customer experience, serving on CVB boards, you know, giving back to her community, doing all the kinds of things that a good business owner should do. And her neighbors up and down the street aren't doing that. And it's not that they're bad people, it's that nobody's told them they have to do that. Nobody said, we'd like to come inspect your property, or you need to provide all street parking, or you need to collect occupancy tax. I mean, nobody's telling these people that because they haven't identified themselves as being a business. There's no license for these folks. And so that's a real life story. Now I'll tell you that on this slide so I can make the connection. You might imagine that Doris has never spoken to City Council. She's never testified to the General Assembly. She's never written a letter to the editor. She just runs her B&B, and you can imagine what's involved in that. She's a wonderful lady, but this is not what she does every day for a living. This organization has helped her to craft her story. She did, in fact, testify to this committee of the General Assembly, and they heard her pretty loudly. And she, you know, the light bulb went off. It's one thing for me as a association head to tell the story about my members. It's another thing for a private business owner to tell that story. She has told this story on national TV. She's told this story in newspapers. She is our rock star, as Steve likes to say. And I guess what I'm telling you is that if you care about this issue, and I assume many of you all do, you should go to this website and find out how you can help resolve it. She's found her voice through this association, who's helped her to find a voice, and there are others who can do that. We just need to tell the story and work to resolve it. So anyway, there's all about Doris. I should have had her picture up there. Here I am testifying in front of Revenue Law Study Committee. This is a standing committee over at the General Assembly. And this is a group of folks who were looking at particularly problems with the state tax system. What's not working? Where are we missing money? Where are there loopholes that we need to close? And so they didn't know about this issue. It's never been addressed at the General Assembly. We asked to get on their radar, went over there and testified, and you know, I mean, they got some budget holes they need to plug over there. And we just said, why aren't you collecting this tax? They owe this tax. Why don't we put a mechanism in place to collect it? And I will tell you that we met with a very, very good response from the General Assembly. In fact, we're extremely encouraged by that. We didn't get anything out of revenue laws. It was late in the session. They wanted to deal with it. It is complicated even for state lawmakers to wrestle with. It's a very complex issue, but they have agreed to work with us, with the Department of Revenue, to try to come up with a solution. So we're optimistic that we can work with the state legislature to collect the sales tax that needs to be remitted, and then ultimately to collect the occupancy tax. The third thing that we're doing is speaking pretty openly to the media. We're engaged in this issue. Anytime the media calls, we try to help frame it in a good way, and then we help connect them with folks who can give voice to this issue. Many of our members have written letters to the editor. Again, this is just one way that we can tell our story. We're also educating stakeholders in forums like this, in Charlotte and Raleigh. We are speaking out to all kinds of groups who want to hear about it and want to roll up their sleeves and help us. And then I want to tell you a little bit about specifically what we're planning to do in the upcoming legislative session, what our goals would be. Again, if we could walk away with 4 wins for North Carolina, it would be that there would be some sort of central registry. Anybody who's in the business of renting rooms ought to make themselves known. And so whether we put state, because we'd like to know on a statewide basis, we'd like to preempt it and know it's statewide. There could be this happening even in small communities across North Carolina. But maybe a state registry isn't the best way. Maybe there's another way to collect this information. But somehow the first piece is making these businesses known. So that's the first piece. And it really precludes everything else we're going to do, because if you don't know who's doing this business, you can't. None of the rest of it really matters. It's hard to affect the rest of it. The second piece would be to collect sales tax. These people are renting rooms. If they're in the business of renting rooms, they're in business in North Carolina, and they ought to collect and remit sales tax. And that's just the way it works. That's fair. That's fair. And so there really doesn't need to be a pass in any way, shape, or form for these types of businesses. The third thing is that they need to collect and remit occupancy taxes. And then fourth, we'd like to deal with the safety and security issues. That is probably going to be a little bit more complicated, but I want to talk to you a little bit about a strategy for doing that. In terms of collecting the sales and occupancy tax, there's a little bit of a challenge because in this state, Airbnb, or I guess everywhere, Airbnb collects dollars from the consumer